I want you to imagine that you're house shopping. Anybody done that before? House shopping, bought a house? Nope, nobody's ever, just me. Okay, yeah, okay. So you guys, some of you know the drill, right? When you decide to house shop, it's a process, okay? So let's say you're gonna go buy a house and you start looking online and you're searching realty websites, and you're driving through neighborhoods that you like looking for sale signs, and you're asking your friends, and you're watching Facebook, and you're trying to find that perfect house, right? And so you start going to open houses and setting up showings, and you walk through house after house, and none of them feel just quite right, and then you find it. You find this house that you just immediately fall in love with. You set up a showing, you're walking through this house, and you're already dreaming about, we could decorate this room this way, and we could buy this furniture that would look so good over here, and what if we did this, and maybe down the road we could add something over here, and your mind is just going, you're like, I gotta have this house. And so you get with your agent, you say, I wanna put an offer together, this is the one, and so you get an offer together, and you submit it, and eventually, let's just say the buyers accept your first offer. Wouldn't that be awesome? So we'll just say it's a story, we can do this any way we want. So they take your first offer, and then you close on the house, and they hand you the keys, right? And you move in, and you get settled, and you're feeling really good till that mortgage payment the bill shows up, And man, it's a lot of money, and so you're like, this house is great, and the mortgage isn't cheap, but I love this place, So you pay the mortgage for a while. And then you start to think to yourself, this is a lot of money, and there's some things I'd like to do. I'd like to buy some new clothes, and it'd be nice to eat out once in a while, but we just don't really have the money. So you have this idea. You think, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to pay most of my mortgage, but I'm just going to trim a little bit off of there and keep some money for myself, because I got some stuff I want to do. And so you're paying 75, 80%. You're putting in a good effort, right? Paying most of your mortgage, you're just keeping a few bucks because you got stuff you want to do, So you do that for a while, and then you think, this is kind of nice. I think I might want to go on vacation, but I need a little more money. And so let's just say that you start trimming a few more bucks off of your mortgage payment, and so now you're paying, let's just say half. Okay, you're sending them half of the money, which that's half the money. You're doing pretty good. You're sending half of the money, and you start going on some trips, and life is good because you got a little more cash to work with, and you think this is kind of nice. In fact, we're going on these trips. It'd be nice to have a new car to go on vacation in. I think maybe if we just cut a little more out of this mortgage payment, we could probably buy a new car. And so you just trim a little more and a little more and a little more until you say, you know what, at this point, we're hardly paying anything. Let's just not pay it at all. And so you just stop paying your mortgage. Now, by this point, they've noticed, let's just assume. And so they get together and they have a meeting, and they're like, hey, this family, they're not paying their mortgage anymore. We don't know what's going on over here. We better find out. So they start calling you and calling you and calling you, and and so what do? Ignore it, right? And you just leave that alone. And so you're ignoring the call, and they keep calling and calling, and finally you've had enough. And so you answer the phone one day, and they say, hey, this is so-and-so from the bank, and we noticed you stopped paying your mortgage, but we have some good news. We really like you, and so we decided to let you stay anyway. That wouldn't happen, right? Why? Because when you bought the house, you signed a contract. And the contract says, you pay the bill, you get the house. You uphold your end of the deal, they uphold their end of the deal. Okay, it works like this. You go get a new cell phone plan. You go over to T-Mobile and you sign up, and they say, it's T-Mobile. So it's $700 a month, and you get unlimited calling, texting, because it's T-Mobile. We're not talking AT&T. This is pricey, right? So it's like you pay your bill, you get the cell phone plan. They expect you to pay the bill to keep the cell phone plan. You don't pay that bill, they're going to cut your cell phone off, all right? Let's talk about another kind of scenario. Let's say that your best friend's getting married, and you're so excited for her. She's been waiting for the longest time to meet the right guy, and she met him, and they're getting married, and they invite you to the wedding. And so you go, and it's a beautiful day, beautiful ceremony. Everything's just right, And they start into the ceremony, and they get to the vows, which is my favorite part, when you get to hear people just kind of make that promise to each other in that moment, to each other and to God. And so they get to the vows, and he gives her his vows, and then she's like repeating her vows, and she goes, I, Pam, take you, Jim. We'll just say that's their names, I, Pam, take you, Jim, to be my lawfully wedded husband, having to hold, for better or worse, richer or poorer, all that kind of stuff. Unless I just don't think you're that attractive anymore, and you play too much golf, and if you're lazy around the house, and then I think I'm out. But otherwise, till death do us part, right? That'd be an awkward wedding, wouldn't it? Here's why. Different kind of relationship. You see, there are people who go into a marriage looking at it like a contract. It's almost like a transaction. And I'm just telling you, if that's how you go into your marriage, you're doomed from day one. Marriage isn't a contract. Almost all of you have signed a contract at some point in your life, and if you haven't yet, you will. A contract is about self-protection. A contract says, you do your part and I'll do my part. But if either one of us stop doing our part, the deal's off. But there's a different kind of agreement. It's not a contract. It's what we call a covenant. And a covenant is not about self-protection. It's about self-surrender. A covenant says, I'm in this with you, and even if you don't always do your part, I'm still in this with you. A covenant says, even if you fail, even if you drop the ball, I'm not backing out. This deal's not off. It's a different kind of relationship. And you need to know that up front today, because what we're going to talk about in this next chapter of Exodus is not a contract that God makes with his people, but it's a covenant. Tim Keller was a famous pastor and author, and he kind of described it this way. A contract is an agreement based on mutual distrust. The covenant is a promise based on mutual devotion. That's what God does in Exodus 19. If you have a Bible, open up to that. As you know, we're tracking with the Israelites all summer long, and we've seen them delivered from slavery in Egypt. They walk through the Red Sea on dry land as God makes a way. He miraculously provides food and water for them, food from the sky, water from a rock. He protects them in battle, fights for them against Amalek, and remember that name because we're coming back to that in a minute. Goes to battle for them, protects them, because he had promised, hey, if you trust me, if you leave Egypt, yes, it's scary out there, life's bad here, it's scary out there, but you go with me, I go with you. I go before you, I walk with you, I got you. And so far, he has been faithful to his promise every single step of the way. And in Exodus 19, what we see, guys, we're in the home stretch of this series, just a few weeks left. They're getting closer to the promised land, and God thinks, they were slaves in Egypt for 430 years. They've been out here in the wilderness for a little while. I better give them some guidelines, some laws, some, like some structure so that they can function as a people, or it's going to be chaos. It's going to be anarchy. It's going to be a mess. And so what God gives them is the law. But before he gets into that, and I'll just tell you right up front, we are not going to talk about the 10 Commandments today or in this series, okay? If you have been in church for a while, you've probably heard or read the 10 Commandments. You may have even studied them. Even if you're brand new to church, you've never been in a place like this, you've heard of the 10 Commandments. We're just not going to take time in this series to get into that, but we're going to take a much higher level view and approach to what we're going to talk about today as we look at like Old Covenant, New Covenant, and the law. Because what God gives them is important. It really is. But we can't even get into that until you understand the kind of relationship that God's trying to set up here, okay? So in Exodus 19, God has a little bit of a conversation with Moses, and he says there's some important stuff that you need to tell the people right up front before we go any further, before we get into this, and he kind of sets the stage, okay? Here's what it says starting in verse 2. After breaking camp at Rephidim, they came to the wilderness of Sinai, and they set up camp there at the base of Mount Sinai. Then Moses climbed the mountain to appear before God. And the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, give these instructions to the family of Jacob, announce it to the descendants of Israel, which, by the way, is just a fancy way to say, tell all the people. And remember, at this point, there are about 1.5 million people, so it's a lot of people, all right? So God's saying, tell all of the people, you've seen what I did to the Egyptians. You know how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. And now, here it is, if you will obey me and keep my covenant, then, okay, we can assume that word's in there. If you obey me and keep my covenant, you'll be my own special treasure from among all the people on the earth. For the earth belongs to me, and you will be my kingdom of priests and my holy nation. This is the message you must give to the people of Israel. So there is the covenant, but let's be honest, it sounds kind of contractual, doesn't it? It's like an if-then relationship. God tells Moses, tell the people, if you uphold your end of the deal, then I will uphold my end of the deal. At face value, that's how it feels. But guys, what you're going to see as we go through this here for the next few minutes is there are so many more layers, there's so much more depth to this, because what God is offering them is more than just protection or food or water or whatever. What he's offering the people is an identity. He's not just saying, yeah, I'll make sure you're not hungry or thirsty, but God is saying, I will be your God, and you will be my people. And I will be with you, and I will walk with you, and I will be faithful. He's saying, you just uphold the law, and that's our deal, right? Walk with me, and I'll show you how to do it. And then he goes on, he gives them the law. He gives them the 10 Commandments, okay? That is in there, Exodus chapter 20, 21, 22. He gives them the 10 Commandments. He gives them some laws about what worship looks like when it's pure and real and authentic. He gives them some laws about justice and mercy, how to treat each other. Because, man, things are getting wild in the wilderness, and he's like, they're going to end up killing each other, so we better talk about justice and mercy. He goes through some stuff with them about the Sabbath, and this is one thing that I think we can't miss, that a God who is willing to put structure and even rules and laws around how we rest, man, that says to me, this is a God that cares about our rest and our health. And he wants us to do that. And I know, man, we could probably preach on this for a while because I do not unplug and rest the way that God probably wants me to. And I'm sure that's true of many of you. The culture that we live in is not a culture that really values or permits that kind of rest. And it is like fighting culture to try to get it. But God says it's important. So I'm going to give you laws around that stuff. He lays all of this stuff out. And then he gives them this incredible promise in Exodus chapter 23. I love this. Verse 20 says, "See, I am sending an angel before you to protect you on your journey and lead you safely to the place I prepared for you." He promises his presence. And that is the old covenant. It's, if you uphold the law, then you will be my people and I'm with you, okay? That's the old covenant. Now here's the problem. The deal was if then, the problem was they couldn't do it. And we talked about this before, okay? This version of the law that they got was pretty simple, pretty concise, definitely big. I mean, you're talking about don't let anything else become a god in your life. Well, there's a lot in there. I mean, we could talk about a lot of things that become gods in our lives that take first place when it should be God's, so we could unpack that. But he goes on, he's like, don't take my name in vain, honor the Sabbath. There's all those kinds of things. And then he gets into don't lie, don't steal, don't cheat, don't commit adultery, don't, covet, all those kinds of things. Honor your father and mother. He starts unpacking some stuff that even those 10 would be almost impossible to keep. And then he adds some things to that. And in the grand scheme on paper, it doesn't look like all that much. But let's just be honest, it's a lot, okay? And then it gets worse because you fast forward through time a few thousand years to the point where Jesus comes onto the scene. And the leaders, the religious leaders, the political leaders, what they've done for a few thousand years is added to and tweaked and changed and added to and tweaked and changed and added to and tweaked and changed to the point where when Jesus shows up, there are more than 600 rules and laws and regulations and guidelines and things they're supposed to do and not do. And it's like, man, if you did nothing but sit all day long and read that list and tell yourself, this is all I'm going to do and not do, and you gave it your full attention, you still could not do it. And that was the case from day one with the people. They just couldn't do it. There was no way. There was no hope. No chance. Okay? And they had a pattern to this. And I'll tell you about the pattern because we see it in the life of a guy named King Saul. When the people get out of Egypt and they're free, they had lived in Egypt for so long, they're just used to having a king. It was just the way they knew things worked. And so after a while, they start to grumble and complain, like, we want a king. God had given them some people called judges to rule over them, but they were like, no, we want a king. And God tried to tell them, this is a bad idea. You do not want a king. Trust me, I'm your king, God said. You don't want a king, don't do it. And God told some of the priests and the prophets, tell the people, they do not want a king. They don't know what they're asking for. This is a bad idea. Let's not go there. But the people would not drop it. They just kept saying, give us a king. And so finally, God says, give them what they want, okay? And God chose a man named Saul to be the first king of Israel. And it starts out great because Saul was fully sold out, totally dedicated to being a good leader, leading God's people in God's way. He was sold out to God in his own life, and it starts out going really well. But then here's the deal. You fast forward just a little bit in Saul's story, and you come to this place where it's kind of toward the end of his life, definitely toward the end of his reign. He's losing his mind. He's paranoid. He's killing anybody that he thinks is coming for him. And he's gone to the point where he's seeking out witches and these evil, people to help him have these seances to tune in and listen to these demonic voices for guidance. And you look at a story like that and you're like, how did you go from being God's man over here, leading God's way, to being like over here, talking to Miss Cleo in a tent somewhere in the wilderness, trying to figure out what to do? How do you fall so far? And I'll tell you, it just happens with one little step. of disobedience. And we see it in 1 Samuel chapter 13. You don't have to turn there, but what happens is Saul and the Israelites are going to war against the Philistines. And God told him one simple thing. He's like, before you go into battle, Saul, I'm going to fight for you. You are going to win this battle, but here's the deal. Have the priest offer a sacrifice before you go into the battle. And this was nothing new to Saul because that's what they did. Priests offered sacrifices. The problem was that Saul was impatient, and he didn't want to wait for the priest to get there, and so Saul just did it himself, which might not seem like a big deal, but in those days, if you weren't a priest, you did not offer the sacrifice. So Saul disobeyed. He was impatient, and he didn't listen to what God told him to do. And because of that, there was a consequence. God said, tell Saul, the kingdom will not endure for his people. In other words, Saul, your descendants, they are not going to get to rule over Israel because of your disobedience. Maybe that seems heavy and cruel and contractual, legalistic, but that was just the first step, because you go forward 2 chapters to 1 Samuel 15 and you see this other battle where Saul and the Israelites are going to battle the Amalekites. Remember last week we talked about how they went to war with Amalek. These are his descendants. So several hundred years later, still a problem, all right? They're going to battle against the Amalekites, and God says, all right, Saul, here's the deal. These people are a problem. So you're going to win this battle, and when you do, because I'm going to fight for you, when you do, wipe everything out. All the people, the cattle, the sheep, the goats, take their possessions, burn them, get rid of everything, keep nothing. Got it? Got it? Good. Okay? So what happens? They go to war, they win the battle. Saul spares the life of the king, keeps him as a prisoner, and he picks some of the nicest cattle and sheep and goats and livestock. He keeps them for himself. And he gets called out on this, and when the priest comes to him and he's like, what are you doing, man? You know what God wanted you to do? And here's what Saul does, okay? At this point, let's just catch up. At this point, he's already compromised because he knew what God wanted him to do, and he disobeyed, so he's compromised. He's compromised on his values. He's compromised on his allegiance to God. But now what you're going to see him do is rationalize, because his response when he gets called out on this is he's like, no, you have the wrong idea. See, I kept this stuff because I'm so thankful that God fought for us in battle that I'm going to sacrifice all this stuff. See, I know God told me to kill all these animals, but I kept them just because I want to worship God because I love him so much. And he starts to rationalize this stuff. And the punishment for this is God says, okay, tell Saul, now we're done here. He's disobeyed. He's out of alignment. He's made it clear this is not going to work, and so I'm going to remove my blessing from him. He's not going to be king anymore. Now, that's the next step in more steps that lead to that place where, we already talked about where he ends up. And so you step back, and again, you look at that story, and you're like, how did he go from here to here? And the answer is very simple. One small step of disobedience. One small wrong turn. I'll put it to you this way, okay? I was thinking about this Friday night when we were leaving the Alive Festival, and we drove separate because we didn't know if our girls were going to make it through the day. We had Ellie and Grace and Braylon with us. We didn't know if they were going to make it through the day, but they were troopers, and so we all left at the same time, about 10:15, 10:30 at night. We all left, but my wife does not like to drive at night. She doesn't like that, and she thinks you get... she thinks if you go in the ocean, there's a shark waiting to eat you, and she thinks if you drive at night, there's a deer waiting to jump in front of your car. And so she says, I'm going to drive slow because I want to watch for deer, And so she went in front of me so that if something happened, I'd be behind her and we'd know what was going to happen. So, y'all, we made it. I may need to come to one of your houses for lunch today because I don't know if I'm going to be allowed to go home after. I love you. She has way more common sense than I do too, so let me just say I'm way more likely to do this, but I'm on the stage and you're not, so I'm telling the story, okay? So we get like 20 feet outside the gate of the Alive Festival grounds, and my GPS says go straight, and she turns left, and I'm like, what is she doing? But I just followed her, I'm a good husband. So I just followed her, And a little while later, we're driving down the road, and the GPS on my end said turn. And she plowed right through that turn. She was like, I'm going straight, So I'm going, what is she doing? I know she hadn't been drinking. What is she doing, And this happens like 3 or 4 more times, to the point where we're like coming through and we're in the middle of nowhere, but we're coming through some town, and the ramp to 77 is like 2/10 of a mile ahead of us. All we have to do is, it's right there. You can almost see it. And she turns down some back road and starts going across a bridge. And at this point, I am so confused. So I start flashing my brights. I didn't know if something was wrong. I'm flashing my brights. So she slows down and pulls over on the side of the road. And I pull up beside her, and probably with not enough compassion at that point, because I was like so confused. I was like, what are you doing? And she looks at me and she's like, I'm following my GPS. And I'm thinking, your GPS sucks. Delete that app, right? But anyway, whatever. I just sped around her. I made a left turn. I made a right turn. We got on the highway. And about 5 minutes later, I love her so much, I get this 4-letter text, and don't judge her for texting and driving. It was 4 letters, okay? And all it says is, oops. She had her GPS set to avoid highways. And so what should have been like a pretty simple, straightforward drive turned into this tour of Amish country as we were just like all over the place, And I tell you that story, 1, right now, because this is a safe place and she can't hurt me, and 2, because that's how it goes with Jesus, all right? You don't wake up in the morning and think to yourself, I'm going to wreck my life today. But usually it's just one turn, and then another turn, and then another turn. And sooner or later, you're supposed to be over here, and you find yourself all the way over here. And now I say that because today, it's very possible, and you don't need me to tell you, and I am not pointing fingers, because okay? But it's very possible that you're here today, but you feel far from God. And maybe you're wondering how you got there. And it's possible that you know what it is. It's possible it was this big thing. But more than likely, it started with just one step or one turn, followed by another, followed by another, followed by another, until you get to the place where you find yourself today, where it feels like you are so distant that you're not sure what the way back is. And if that's where you are today, I want to tell you something. I want to tell you that there is hope. Okay? Let me put it this way. There's a pastor named Craig Groeschel who said, the slow fade into spiritual apathy doesn't start with rebellion. It starts with one compromise we pretend doesn't matter. So first, what I want you to do is ask yourself a question. And it's a simple one, but it's a hard one to ask. And that's just simply this. Is there some area of my life, is there some part of me, is there some action or behavior or pattern or circumstance where I am compromising? Where I know and I understand what obedience to God, to His Word, to His truth would look like, but I'm doing my thing. Is there an area where you're compromising? And then ask yourself this, is there an area where you're rationalizing? Maybe you're saying to yourself, it's just one drink. I won't let it go too far. Or maybe you're saying, me, my boyfriend, my girlfriend, we get close. We have some boundaries. We won't take it too far. Or maybe you're saying, it's okay. It's not gossip if it's a prayer request. I can share that story, right? Ooh, that's awkward in church. Where are you rationalizing? Where are you doing something that you shouldn't do, but you've got an excuse for it? And you're explaining it away. And you've got a reason. I'm going to challenge you to do something. And this may not be easy to do. But my challenge is, write it down, whatever it is. Write it in your phone right now. Pull one of the envelopes out of the back of the seat in front of you. If you're at home, grab a piece of paper or something. Write whatever that thing is down. And I'm not going to ask you to do anything with it. You can crumple it up and put it in your pocket or throw it away or whatever, but write it down, because I think something happens when you just put something on paper or whatever, you put it down. And the reason is, we say this often around here, you can't defeat what you don't define. So until you get intentional and you call out that thing in your life, that area where maybe it's like, you're kind of like soul GPS is like, go this way, but you've kind of done one of these. Until you call that thing out, you're not putting yourself in a place where you've been honest enough to confess to God that this is an area that you've got to take more seriously and bring into alignment, and you are not likely to get where you need to be. More than likely, you're going to find yourself even further away than you are right now. So write that thing down. And as you do, here's what I want you to think about. Okay, I told you there's hope. Here's the hope. There's a big tension in all this that we got to wrestle down. And the tension is exactly what we said earlier, that even if we fully committed and went all into saying, I want to be fully obedient, fully surrendered, Jesus, you get every part of my life. If we said, I'm going to go all in on this, 100%, we still could not do it. Okay? It's impossible, which sounds hopeless until you start to get a picture of what Scott was kind of teeing up for us earlier, and that is the grace and the goodness and the mercy of Jesus. See, here's the truth. Anything less than full obedience, anything less than full surrender is no good. Partial obedience might as well be full disobedience. Partial surrender might as well be no surrender. I heard somebody say one time, if I don't make Jesus Lord of all in my life, eventually he won't be Lord at all. And so it's full obedience and it's full surrender. But if we can't do that, if we're not capable of that, if we can't give that, then what hope would there be? And I'll tell you, the hope is this, okay? In Matthew chapter 26, this is the night that Jesus would eventually be betrayed and arrested and led to a trial that he should have never been led to, falsely accused, things he didn't do, charged with those things and sentenced to death on a cross, right? But if you rewind that tape a few hours, we find Jesus eating dinner in an upstairs room at a house in the south end of Jerusalem with his friends. And he says something really, really critical, okay? In Matthew 26, it says this, he took a cup of wine and gave thanks to God for it, and he gave it to them and said, each of you drink from it, for, listen to this is my blood which confirms the covenant. Confirms the covenant between God and his people, and it's poured out as a sacrifice to forgive the sins of many. Those words are just insanely important. Confirms the covenant, and here's why. I have heard pastors mess this teaching up so much because they'll say things like, oh, Jesus came to the old is gone. That stuff doesn't matter anymore. Jesus came to do away with all that stuff, and that's not true, and Jesus himself just said it. Jesus didn't come to abolish or eliminate or erase the old covenant. What he said is, my blood, the blood that I'm about to go to the cross to shed for you, the death that I'm about to endure, all the stuff I'm going to go through for you, that doesn't erase anything. What that does is confirms the covenant that says, I will be their God, they will be my people. That promise God made to you, that covenant that he made with you, Jesus said, I'm about to set that thing in stone. And here's how it's going to work. Jesus is saying, man, you can't be good enough. And you can sin and sacrifice and try to make things right with God. You can be in this fruitless, vain pursuit for the rest of your life, chasing down some sort of, image of perfection that you can never live up to. That standard that the law sets, that it reveals, that it kind of establishes for us. It's really clear when you get in the book of Romans, it says, for all have sinned and fall short of God's glory. That means that you, me, anybody you've ever met, the Pope, nobody can live up to that standard. No matter how holy anybody thinks they are, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And Jesus in this verse is saying, yeah, I acknowledge that. That's true. You'll never be good enough, but I am. And I've got you. You're covered. And the blood that I'm about to shed seals the promise that you will be my people. And so what that means is that if you put your faith and your trust in Jesus to be the Lord and Savior of your life, you're in. That's the good news. And so here's what you may need to hear today. This is the hope. You ready? My position as a child of God has nothing to do with my obedience. My position as a child of God has nothing to do with my faithfulness or consistency or dedication. It's not like a batting average, like you hit more than you miss, you know what I mean? It has nothing to do with that. And neither does yours. Your position as a child of God, as his people, has nothing to do with your obedience or lack thereof. It has to do with one and only one thing, and that is with Jesus' obedience. And here's what I mean. In Philippians, Paul writes, though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to, but instead he gave up his divine privileges. And he took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. And when he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience to God. And he died a criminal's death on a cross. Okay, well, what's that mean? Let me tell you. Go back to that room where dinner's happening. Fast forward a little bit. Jesus is in the garden praying, And he has this conversation with God, and it's this amazing picture. I mean, how many times do you get to look in on a conversation where God is talking to God? That's pretty cool. And in this conversation, Jesus is just raw and honest. And I'll paraphrase a little bit, but basically he's like, God, this is not what I want to do. What's ahead for me tonight, the next few days, this is not what I want to do. If there is any other way, I am all ears. We have time to pivot. We have time to rethink this thing. I don't want to go through this. Anything else, any other way. And then he says, but not my will, but your will be done. And the interesting thing when you dig into that verse is, in English, the word will is just one word. But when you go back to the original language in Aramaic, there are two words. One word means preference, the other means purpose. And so here's what Jesus is saying. He's saying, God, any other way we can do this, any other way, I'm in. I do not want to go to the cross. I don't want to have to do that. But if that's what it takes, because we love them so much, then not my preference, but your purpose be done. And he was obedient, and he went to the cross. And because of that, because of his death and his resurrection, there's hope for us. Because Jesus was obedient. Now we have hope for a future, eternity in heaven, and we're part of God's family, and the good news is that anybody, again, who puts their faith and their trust in Jesus as Lord and Savior of their life is in. You're in, and you are in for good. And it's not about how good you are or are not. It's about how good Jesus is. But then there's this. Philippians 2, verse 5. So just before that passage we read a minute ago, Paul says, you must have the same attitude that Christ Jesus had, which was obedience. Not my preference, God, but your purpose. Around here we say a lot. We want you to find three things: hope, purpose, and a place to belong. That's our vision. I'm just going to be honest with you. If you're going to find your purpose, it starts when you surrender your preference, or whatever it is. And you say, okay, God, my life won't be about me anymore. I'm going to try to make it about you. I'm going to do my best to make it about you. And listen, then that obedience, is it still a thing? Yeah, remember, Jesus didn't abolish the old covenant. He fulfilled it, right? He sealed the promise. He locked it in. But then obedience becomes about a whole different thing, because obedience isn't about trying to be God's child anymore, be good enough, or earn God's grace, or earn God's love, or earn redemption, or earn forgiveness. It's not about any of that anymore. Obedience becomes about realizing, not that if I'm obedient enough I could be God's, but it's about realizing that through Jesus I already am. And then it's just a natural response to say, God, if you were willing to go so far for me and do so much for me and endure so much for me and love me so much, how could I do anything less than give you every part of my life, my soul, my heart, my mind? That's obedience. And guys, that's the new covenant. And so here's the cool thing. You know, we'll say things like in church, maybe you've heard somebody say this, like, God doesn't change. He doesn't. And sometimes people have a hard time reconciling like Old Testament God with New Testament God. And the cool thing is you totally reconcile it when you get into this stuff, because you find out he hasn't changed. The promise that he made to Moses all those years ago is still the promise that he makes to you and to me today. And that is, if you will put your faith and your trust in me, if you will walk with me, not because you're obedient and not because you're good and not because you deserve it or earn it or any of that stuff, but just because you trust that Jesus deserved it and earned it for you, you're my people. Promise. That's the covenant. So, I don't know what that means for you today, but it should be leading you to like a decision point, to a crossroads, and it looks like this. Whatever that thing is that you thought of earlier, that area of your life where you're compromising, then the decision point for you is you take that thing, you call it out, maybe you write it down, whatever it looks like, but you get intentional about it, and you've got to have a serious conversation about God. And it's an honest conversation where you say, God, this thing in my life that I'm holding on to, I know it's a problem, but I just don't know what to do. Because it's bigger than me, It's got a hold on me. I don't know how to get out of this. I don't know how to deal with this. I've made so many mistakes. I've made such a mess. God, I don't know where to start. And you know what He'll say to you? I know. But let me help. And through His Spirit working in your life, He will begin to work in you, and He'll work on you, and He'll work in your soul, and He'll renew your mind, and He'll renew your spirit, and He'll repair relationships. And He'll work in a way that only He can work, that I'm just going to be honest with you, if you do it by yourself, it won't work. But if you let God work in your life, man, He'll do things that you can't do. Maybe there's something you're rationalizing, you're explaining away, and you've got excuses. And I'm sorry if this offends you, but it's time for you to shut up and drop the excuses. And stop reasoning it away, because we want to do that. I've done that so many times. We want to do that, but it's time for us to just say, okay, God, my excuses aren't good enough. And then you have that conversation with Him, and so you come to a decision point. And then there's this. Maybe for you, the decision is it's time to trust Him with your life for the very first time, because you've never done that before. And so we talk about the grace of God, but you haven't experienced the grace of God. So you got some options, okay? Option number one is this can be your day. We've had people in both services today who've made that decision. They said, I'm ready to go all in, not part way, not halfway, not most of the way, all in. Jesus, I'm going to give you every part of me as much as I can, and the parts of me that I can't figure out how to give you. I need your help, but I want to work on that. Like, I am all in. We've seen people do it in both services, and you can walk out of here today. You can make that decision before you leave. This can be your day. In a minute, we're going to sing a song. I'm going to hang out over here, probably over by the baptistry. I'll go over to the side. Everybody's going to be standing up. It might feel awkward to you to come down here and talk to me. Don't let it feel awkward. If God is nudging you right now saying, trust me, walk with me, follow me, you better listen. Trust Him, walk with Him, follow Him. Come talk to me. I'll pray with you. We'll get you in the water. We'll baptize you. We got clothes. We got hair dryers. We got everything you need. You don't have to worry about it. If you had lunch plans, cancel them. Go to Taco Bell. They don't care what you look like, okay? It needs to be your day. Option number two. We're going to do the same thing next Sunday. And by the way, we do this all the time. You get baptized on a Tuesday afternoon. We don't care. But next Sunday, we're changing things way up. We're going to do one song at the beginning of the service. I'm going to come out and preach a short sermon. We're going to do some more music at the end. And we're going to celebrate with some people making this decision. And I'm telling you now, because maybe I'm talking about this and you're like, I want to do this, but I want my family to be here and they're not here today. I'm giving you a heads up. Bring them next Sunday and come in here ready to say, Jesus, I'm all in. I'm all yours. I'm going to follow you. I'm going to walk with you. I'm going to trust you. And then what He'll do is He'll show you what real love looks like, and real grace and real forgiveness. And so if you're kind of at one of those crossroads, I know it can be a hard decision to make. I just want to pray for you right now. So let's pray together. Thank you, God, so much for the lives that we've already seen change here today. And I'm thankful for the things that you're doing in some people's minds and hearts right now. I'm thankful for the ways that you're speaking, and through your Spirit, the ways that you're pushing us. Some of us have been walking with you for a really long time, and we're just still figuring out how to do it without stumbling all over ourselves. And so, God, we ask for a reminder of your grace. We don't need to ask for your grace because you've already given it to us. We just forget sometimes. And so I pray that you would remind us of that, of your mercy. Sometimes we just need to sense you and hear you standing with us, saying, hey, I love you. You're mine. I pray for that. And God, I pray for people who are considering trusting you for the first time, and maybe for some of them that's an exciting thing, and for some that could be a battle. And God, I pray for peace and assurance and courage to take a step, whatever that looks like. I pray for your voice to speak clearly. And God, I pray for lives to change, because as your kingdom grows, as lives change, it's such a testament to your goodness that said, when you're not good enough, I'll be good enough. So thank you for that, God. Thank you for working. Thank you for moving.